Today we want to carry on from our lecture of yesterday on mindfulness. I hope you found it useful. I hope that, yeah, they can hear us good. I hope that you have many questions. We will leave time for questions. So just to recap where we started from yesterday. We were talking about what the mind is, and we were talking about the human mind as being the only mind on this planet that has the ability to discriminate. And that ability of discrimination, with the ability of having time outside of what you might call a programmed life. If you think of the life of an animal, it's a very programmed life. Eat, reproduce, run away from other animals that are going to kill it and eat it. And that's it. That's the life. When we want to eat, we open the fridge. We don't have to farm. We don't have to hunt. We don't have to gather. We open the fridge, or we find Deliveroo or whoever it is, which gives us time. And when we have time, we also don't worry about being eaten by other animals. We live in houses. And what happens is that in that time, we have the ability also to discriminate. We know what is right and what is wrong. And this time with this ability is the reason that we can progress spiritually. Nobody else has that ability because they neither have the time or the ability. So important to understand that. The second thing that's important to understand is that as Jains, we believe in duality, body and soul. Physical body and Atma or energy soul. One is temporary and will die. One is permanent and will reincarnate. That is the fundamental basis of our belief. And it's very interesting that those that are the people who have experienced or have an intense belief in the soul, we call this term Samyak Darshan. The life they lead is typically that of a sadhu, which means that they have zero materialism. Whilst the rest of us, before we get to that, have 100% materialism. We measure and compare and acquire and accumulate. And that is all about materialism. We spend our whole life earning to have more materialism. You know, we have a house, we want a bigger house, and then a second house, and then a house for our holidays, etc., etc. Whereas these people have one piece of cloth, walk barefoot, and beg for food. And the only difference is they have discovered their soul. So the materialism is related to the body. Therefore, it's temporary, it'll die. And the soul is eternal, which tells us that all our lives are rotated around this physical, materialistic life and not about what is going to happen in the next life, because to believe in that, you need to have belief that you will have a next life. And what you do today, you may not see the reward until the next life. We're impatient, we want our reward tomorrow. And so this is the big difference. And then the thing that is also interesting is that we talked about karma being attracted to us by any action of mind, speech, and body. And we said that those actions are actually equal. And since we're too scared to speak and too scared to do, we spend most of our activity in thought. And it is therefore the mind that is attracting the karma, because that action attracts. The second thing we said is that when it attracts, it needs a glue. The glue is your passion. If you attract but there's no passion, it'll come and go. That passion we sometimes call rag, as in rag dvesh. And if we call it rag, and rag is the sort of anger and arrogance and all those passion qualities, then the people who don't have that are called vitrag. And we call our tirthankars and our very senior sadhus vitragi, without passion. Because even though they do actions that get the karma to them, they don't have the passions to bind them. And so the karma comes and goes. Whereas we lead a life full of passionate thoughts. Thoughts about anger, or pride, or being deceitful or greedy. And it is those thoughts that are binding the karma, which means that we have a next life, but we will also suffer the same fate that we are thinking about others. And that is why people go in cycles. You know, when you say this man is angry, he's not really angry, he just has thoughts of anger. And because he has thoughts of anger, other people are angry at him and he has more thoughts of anger, and that cycle carries on. And that cycle means that he is now bound in birth and death. And this is why, to explain how difficult it is to get out of the cycle, even Tirthankar Bhagavan Mahavir in his last life took 12 years from Diksha to the point he was liberated of meditation. So somebody at that level had 12 years. So this is because you have to remove everything you have bound in countless previous years. And therefore, it's not a very easy thing to do. So we then talked about karma and said that karma, when you bind it, is bound without anybody's name on it, a third person's name. So it doesn't say this person did this to me. That's not the karma. It is just the anger, the passion that you have, which means it doesn't take a third person. It is what you inflict on yourself. And secondly, when you experience it, it doesn't take that third person for you to experience it. All it means is that that karma is rising within you, and you are therefore looking for something to then trigger it. If you have intense feelings of jealousy, you will find something to be jealous about. If you have intense feeling of anger, you will find something to be angry about. Having anger and being angry are two very different things. One is the feeling, and the other is your passion. It is possible to have the feeling, but not the passion. But we have the passion, and that passion is the glue that binds all the karma to our soul. Okay? And this is what keeps us in a cycle. So when we describe somebody as vitrag, what we are saying is that that is the quality we want to attain if we want to be similar to them without passion. Right? And just think about that logically, that, how many times in a day do you have thoughts that are not related to the activity you're doing? You're sitting there cutting vegetables or cooking or whatever. How many thoughts are you having? Each one is karma, right? And then in all of those, how much are you then, for want of a technical word, adding masala to those thoughts? Because it's your thoughts. Nobody else is seeing them. If other people were watching those thoughts, I bet you would control them. But shh. So what happens is that you basically, if you think about the consequence of that, thoughts are yours. The karma is bound by you. The karma is suffered by you. And then when it rises, you basically have more thoughts, more interactions, and you bind more karma. And in that cycle, there is nobody else. So when you're in pain and when you're suffering, always remember that you caused that pain. You cause that suffering. Nobody else is involved in this equation. So when we point fingers and say, because of him this happened, or because of her, or she said this, or he said that, they might have done all of that, but that wasn't the cause and that wasn't the result. At best, it might have been a catalyst. So that was yesterday. Today, we'll talk a little bit about what are thoughts and who do they belong to. Now, when you've bound karma, and we'll make this simple, very non-technical, but when you've bound karma, and that karma, for example, is anger, what is the process from having that karma to the point where you become angry? Because it's important to understand this. Now, firstly, if you accept that it is a particle, a physical particle called karma, that is causing the anger, if you believe that, truly believe that, you have then started the first step of believing that it is something external to your soul that is that anger. When you go to these meditation and other courses, how often do they say, the anger is not me, this is not my anger? So the reason is that if you are having that emotion, there has to be a cause of that emotion, because your soul, by its nature, is blissful. It is happy, it is in the state of contentment, it is all-knowing, but it is blissful. So the karma or the anger is not something that is inherent in the soul. Something else must be causing this. And so you have this physical particle that called karma that has been bound, let's say, for 5 years, and that 5 years has finished. So it now needs to give you its impact. The way it gives you the impact is that it rises. Karma no udaitai, we say in Gujarat. Right? And at that point, it then has to do something. And what it does is that in this thing called the mind, which we said yesterday is throughout your body, it's not your brain. That is a physical organ. It is throughout your body. In that place called the mind, it creates this emotion. And this emotion is anger. Now, in some people, you can actually see this. You can look at them and say, they're looking a bit short-tempered today, or, anxious today, or they look like they're going to become angry. That is that anger karma rising. And as it rises, it gives you thoughts, it gives you feelings, it gives you emotions. And then yesterday, what we said is that it needs something. So this is the gun that is loaded. Now you need something to pull the trigger. And that is anything that makes you angry. Even if it's something that you're not normally angry with, you'll look at it and today you'll become angry. How many kids do I know who know that their mother is a bit angry today and go and hide, stay out of the way? So in this scenario, what happens is that you have a mind that is angry or having anger. And by the way I always think about the difference between a thought, having a thought, and actually thinking is what you do with your brain. When you have to solve a problem, when you have something that you're physically thinking about, but the thought is something that comes to you. Suddenly out of the blue, you have a thought, or you have a feeling, or you have an emotion. So you have this thought, and this thought, or this feeling, or this emotion is anger. At that point, you have to feed it. You have to give it life. You have to give it energy. If you're sitting in meditation, what do they keep saying? If the thoughts come, watch them and let them go. Because they're not your thoughts. And if they've come to you, watch them and let them go. If you watch them and let them go, they will go. But we do the opposite. We grab hold of this and say, this is our thought, my thought. And then you feed it. Because what you do is you take all the things that have influenced you. So what influenced you? You have years of memories, sometimes called baggage, because you remember things. This person said this person did this person, behaved like this. Therefore, when this emotion is there, you attach the memories to that emotion. I'm so angry, and I remember the last time he did this and this and this, and I'm not going to let him do it this time. You also take your experiences. And as humans, we have one quality that no other animal has, which is we adopt other people's experiences. Animals retain their own. We're happy to. So if Dhirubhai tells me that if I put on my best Rolex watch, which he's going to lend me, and my best gold chain, and I walk from here to the station, I will get mugged, because every time he's done that, he's got mugged. Guess what? I've now adopted that experience. And if I'm about to walk out, I'll say, oh yeah, this is the place I get mugged. I've never been mugged. But he told me he has, so I've taken that experience on. So I've now got my memories, my experience, and other people's experience. And then I look at the two emotions that actually drive me completely. The first is fear. How many of us lead our lives based on what other people might say, what other people might think? If I don't do this, how will it look? If I do something like this, what will people say about me? So you conform because of this fear. And the second, which is the most materialistic thing that you can do, is that you look at attachment. You add this word I and mine to everything. My children, my house, my car, my career, and God forbid anybody say anything about them, because that triggers your anger. So you've now got all of these things. And just think about all of those things. Within that, when you then have this emotion coming up, and you mix that emotion, even with those thoughts, you don't even necessarily need to have anybody in front of you. You've already started to make your story. You've already started to think about what has happened, what you will do, what you will say, what he might say. And as I said, this, from a Jain perspective, is as good as doing it or saying it. And therefore, you're binding that karma already. So you've taken a foreign particle, let it give you emotion, added all your masala into it, made that emotion big, put more energy into it. For 15 minutes now, your mind is thinking all these things, and you've bound all of this back in. And guess what? It's going to happen again. And that is the cycle. And what happens in that cycle is that it affects our whole idea of happiness. Because what we have done is made ourselves anxious or depressed or unhappy or whatever condition we put, but it has nothing to do with the environment we're in. It has nothing to do with the people we're around. We've just caused it ourselves. And that it goes for everything, that when we're in an environment, it doesn't really matter about that environment. It is absolutely possible to be ecstatically happy in any environment, or have the luxuries of the world around you and be miserable and sad. And the reason for that is the mind. So let's talk a little bit about how these things work. If you look at, I'm going to talk about a couple of things, and then I'll talk about what this meditation looks like, or this thought process looks like. Let's start with this idea of fear. If you think about this idea of fear, what is fear? Fear is this idea that you think of something that is unknown, something that hasn't happened, something that may not happen. And you imagine all the things that could happen just in case. If I walk from here to the station, what happens if I get mugged? If I'm dressed like this, is somebody going to come and attack me? If I have a watch on, are they going to come and take my watch? I have thought of 100 possibilities, yet nothing has happened. And so because of those things, I model my whole conduct, everything I do, on those thoughts. And so this fear actually dictates my life. And that is something you see in most people. It's not about being careful, it's just about being scared of all of those things. And the second is this idea of attachment, that something will happen to those people that are attached, that I am attached to, or things that I'm attached to. If you have a brand new car and somebody scrapes the paint, we all know that it's a simple fix, but it's my car, my new car, and there is now somebody that has damaged it. It's not the damage that's the issue, it's the attachment to that car that's the issue. Because if it was a hire car, you say, oh, I'll just get it in the garage and it will be fine. So your attachment and your fear become the drivers of your day-to-day actions. And think about that from the perspective. We talked about two lives, the lives of people like us and the lives of sadhus who have realized what their soul is. So in their lives, what do? They walk from place to place without mobile phones and without credit cards. Do they know where they're going to get to stay? Do they know what they're going to eat? Do they know who's going to attack them? Who's going to come and talk to them? If you start to do that, the one thing it does psychologically is breaks your fear. And that's why it's one of the things that is prescribed. You don't have fear because you're now happy going into the unknown with the faith that my karma is good, nothing will happen to me. That is what faith is. You have belief in this. And when you think of attachment, when you have to live on two pieces of cloth and that's it, what can you be attached to? So if you think about those two human conditions, one of the first things that you do when you take Diksha is actually remove those conditions, because those conditions actually dictate our day-to-day life. Okay? So I'm just going to see if there's a question. So the next thing then to think about is, what is this masala that we make in our mind made of? And again, it's very important to think about this. So we have this habit of, politely we say people are lost in thought, or they're absent-minded, or they're, their focus is somewhere else. What we actually mean is that they're running on autopilot and their mind is running separately on autopilot. And in that autopilot, like everything else, Jainism has given this a name. So there are two types of what we call dhyan, meditation, that people tend to do. The first is called Artha Dhyan. And this is about pain and sorrow, mainly about ourselves. How often do we feel sorrow about our situation? Feel so sorry for ourselves that this happened or this didn't happen, or, in that sorrow, what we imagine is either that that pain has been inflicted on us, or somebody has done something for us to suffer that pain. And that's because we still look outside of us for things to happen. One of the things we talked about yesterday was it's not possible for somebody to do something to you, or for you to do something to somebody. And yet what happens is that it's much easier to blame it on bad luck, or this person, did this, or because of that person, this happened. And yet the reality of this, whilst we're blaming others, the reality of this, if you believe in this Atma and karma, is that this is your karma giving effect. Who bound that karma? You did. Who is suffering that karma? You are. There's no third person in the equation. But by blaming that person and having that sorrowful, whether it's about your condition or what somebody's done, having that sorrowful thought, you've just guaranteed that it'll happen again because you found the same karma. And then what you do is you look at situations. So you've worked very hard all year and you're overlooked for the bonus. You're not given that promotion. Again, I feel a bit sorry for myself, and I blame the other person who didn't see how much work I put in. We've all done this, but we have to start recognizing that this is our mind doing this to us. The other is that how often do you see people who have illness, who get disease, who get some kind of health condition, and that becomes the source of such misery. And the situations, so an example I sometimes give is that you're driving in a car, somebody cuts you off, pulls right across you. What's your first reaction? You shout and swear at them. Because you're in enclosed windows, they're never going to hear you, but you're happily shouting and swearing. So you suffered an experience because of your karma, but yet you have already reacted. The second thing that happens is that you go a bit further along and you see that person being pulled over by the police. What do? You're now happy, I'm glad, I hope he gets 6 points, and I hope his license goes, and what have you done? So one small incident you have now accumulated so many times and bound it back in. This is how we cause our own suffering. Okay? This is how. And then the other thing that we are very good at doing is when there is something that is difficult. So your children need to pass their exams to get to college. From the point they start that year, your tension and your worry is gone up. So what does that tell you? That means that your happiness is now a proxy. It's now being given to somebody else. If that child works diligently, you're happy, and if they don't want to work, you're sad. So your happiness and sadness now belongs to somebody else. And then they sit their exams, and for 3 months you're praying, I hope he gets into college. I hope he then, gets a good career and settles down and gives me grandkids and blah, 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 blah. And yet, none of this is in your control. None of it. But you are sitting there, and if it doesn't happen, again, we go back into the cycle. Oh, what will people say? And, now what will become of him? And do you see what I'm saying? And what did we say yesterday? That we are all on our own personal journeys. The people who are with us today may not be with us tomorrow, because it depends on what karma they bind as to where they end up next. And in this, what we're doing is attaching everything to them as if our life mattered on it. But at the end of this life, we won't matter to anybody. So that is one type. The other type is to look at, is called Rodra Dhyan. So the first one was Artha Dhyan. Artha Dhyan is painful or sorrowful meditation, and Rodra Dhyan is cruel or evil or harsh meditation. So how often, let's think about this, how often do we delight in seeing others in pain? When we don't like somebody and we see something that happens to them, when we're in a situation where somebody who, we thought was bigger than us suffering, we're very happy saying, see, even they suffer. This is, I'm happy where I am. But all you're doing is affecting your own journey, because whether he's suffering or not, it has no impact on you. If you also think about these things, whether we do them or not, we actually have thoughts about, if we did this and this, it might be a bit of cheating, but we can get something. Or if we, weren't quite truthful, or if we were a bit cunning or a bit devious, all these things that are considered cruel or evil, we don't necessarily have the guts to do them, but we have the mind to think about them. And in that thought process, that's all we're doing. We're thinking about things that don't happen. Now, when you look at this, think about this in this way, that although your mind has memories, and although your mind has records of all your experiences, your mind is limited by the fact that it collects them from your senses. And your senses are very limited. You can't see what's behind this wall. There's a wall, that's it. That's the limit of your senses. You can't see what's going on in the other hall. Even in this hall, you'll be distracted. Your phone buzzes, you're distracted. Somebody behind you talks, you're distracted. You have a thought, you're distracted. So you remember a little bit, and as we said, you fill in the gaps. Once you've filled in the gaps, this is your memory that only exists in your mind. It doesn't exist anywhere else. Yet it becomes the source of the pain, of the cruelty, of the suffering, of the sorrow, which you then use to bind the next one. If, for example, Dhirubhai walks across and doesn't even say hello, and I'm sitting there saying, I think he's now thinks he's become a big man. He doesn't need to say hello to me anymore. It doesn't matter. I'll find somebody else, blah, 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 blah. He doesn't even realize. So I have now made up this story. I have now made up all these assumptions. I have now done all of this in my mind. And yet he doesn't even realize that this is happening. So in all of this, always remember that memory, that experience, that recollection only exists in your own mind, nowhere else. And so when you use it to kind of make a decision or kind of think about things, what you're using is something that you have created that is a very small, partial view of reality. In Jainism, we call this anekantva, that reality has multiple sides. Our view of that is very, very tiny. So when we look at Artha Dhyan and Rodra Dhyan, there are two other aspects of this that are really important. The one is looking backwards, the first one. We spend a lot of our time looking at things that happened to us and then saying, what if that hadn't happened? What if I had done this? What if I had said that? If that person hadn't done this, my outcome would have changed. If that were true, that means that other person has the ability to change your outcome. They must be God, because they have to change your karma. And yet we kind of sit there and reflect and play back in our minds. They said this, I said this, they said this, I said, if I had said this, it would have been different. And in that sorrow that we cause, in that reflection and so on, what happens is that we then convince ourselves that what we did was the best thing for us. We tried. But in reality, what happened. And if today you're in a position that you're happy with in any way, you wouldn't be in this position if all of those things hadn't happened. So everything that happened because you had to get here. But we look at that, even though we're here, we're here, but we could have been much further if all of these things hadn't happened. What they are, you have to think about these as learnings. That's what they are. If you go to Mombasa on the beach in Kenya, and you're on the beach, but you've never had swimming lessons, you'll sit there and say, oh, the sea looks so nice, but don't really want to go in, I might get pulled out or whatever. And so that's the limit of what you do. If you've put the effort in and you've learned this, you've learned that bit. There's no need to learn that again. You go there, you can go and swim, and you have the experience. Life is the same. Every time something happens, it's because you're missing something. If you learn that and you understand that, it'll never happen again, because now you know how to handle it. And so what has happened through your past to get you to this position is life has given you lessons to make you the person you are today, because you had to be to get to this point here. What we do is we go back and try and change all of that. But in changing all of that, the only impact we have is we add karma to our load, because we're adding both the thoughts and the passions to make that happen. The second thing that we do is we focus forwards. That I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, this will happen, that will happen. And in both of these, where are we living? We're living in this memory that we've created of the past, and this imagination that we've created of the future. What if this happens? What if I do that? In those scenarios again are in your mind, and yet you live in them. When you're living in them, where are you not living? Here. But where are you binding your karma? Here. And how are you binding it? Ajanta, all unknowing, because you're lost in that thought. You're living in the past, you're living in the future, you're imagining what might be, and you're trying to remember what was. And in the present, today is gone. Again, think about, and I keep referring to this because there is psychology in this, but think about what happens when you take diksha. The fact that you walk and sweep in front of you, making sure there's, no insects. When you do things, you sit down, you have to first inspect the ground. You're bringing awareness to now. Everything that you do has to be done with awareness. Not absent-mindedly that I just come and sit down and there might be 5 cockroaches on here that I've just crushed. And that awareness means that you become careful rather than careless. Carelessness is one of the biggest factors within ignorance of causing sin. Because we do it unknowingly. We basically, if, for example, you go out tonight and you come home at 1 o'clock and you open the door. If you're careful, there are people sleeping, you open the door quietly, won't make any noise. And if you're daydreaming, you open the door, go in, maybe even forget about it, and slam it shut. In that scenario, what have you done? You have effectively become the catalyst for somebody to wake up out of their sleep and think, don't these people even have common sense to close the door? Because you've become the catalyst for them to have that thought. And so this is what the difference becomes, that if you are able to not forget, but control the thoughts that were in the past, because what can you do about them? Nothing. And if you can stop the thoughts about the future, because you have no idea how you're going to get there, because you have no idea what karma you have with you that is going to get you there, then you start to become focused on the here and the now. So that when you're driving, you don't arrive somewhere and say, how did I get here? Or did I pass that? Because you're so in automatic mode, you do this drive every single day that you have no idea how you got here. And your mind, bear in mind, you have this thing called a subconscious mind that runs you on autopilot. When you're fast asleep, who is making sure your heart is beating and your stomach is digesting and all the other things are going? Your mind is doing all this, your function, your brain function. So you have a very powerful automatic subconscious mind that will do things for you. When you play sport, they talk about muscle memory. Muscle memory is effectively your body training to do certain things in certain situations. You can train it. If you become present, then you are actually in active control. If you're in active control, you have two big advantages. One is that you are mentally disciplined, so you can do things knowingly, consciously. If at that point you decide to swear at somebody, it's fine. You've consciously sworn at somebody, rather than reacting to something that happens. You will, but you've done it knowingly. Right? If you do it knowingly, that's up to you. That's a decision. You might buy more, but you've done it knowingly. The problem is doing it unknowingly. And the second thing that the carelessness does is that it means we become conscious of not becoming that catalyst that triggers other people's thoughts, passions, and cruel and sorrowful meditation. If we don't do it consciously, we're just going automatically, and other people, how many times do you see with young kids that they don't wash their dishes after they eat? And how many mothers do you see who get irritated because the kids haven't washed their dishes? So the kids are, in other thoughts, and therefore this unknowingly happens constantly. Now, the problem with that these days is also really twofold. The first is that if you think about this idea of body and soul, the body functions through the senses, the five senses. Some people actually, look at these senses and say that that is the source of not our knowledge, but also our emotions and our passions and whatever, because we react to things we see and hear and touch and taste and so on. If you eat something and there is no salt, you will know that there is no salt. So it is our sense that is doing that. And when we think about the soul, think about all the things we do about the soul. We sit in meditation, we close our eyes, we pray. We're trying to go inwards. And in that trying to go inwards, we're trying to realize what is in there, because it is the permanent part of us. But today there are two big issues with this. One is that people, especially children, have this habit of, headphones and screens and whatever, which stimulates the senses. And by stimulating them, what you're doing is actually moving away from this idea of what is internal to what is external. that you're perpetuating the external senses to the point where you can't calm them down enough to actually understand and feel and experience what's inside of you. And the second is that through this idea of social media, you're amplifying all your actions. If I follow so many people on social media, and it's all about where they go on holiday and what they've had for dinner and who they've met today. And in that amplification, your life becomes that of doing things, capturing them on a photo, sending them out, right? And what you're doing is increasing your interaction. When we do pratikama, how often do we talk about setting limits so that your sins are controlled within an area, yet we amplify to the world and we walk around with stimulants that affect our senses. And when you do those two things, by definition, you move away from soul and basically enhance your belief of that body. And that is the differential between us and those who take Diksha, where our belief lies. Because those who take it give up totally everything we live for. And if in what we live for, we enhance that, that takes us even further into the body element. So when you think about that, think about those 3 or 4 things. Let me just recap them, and then we'll take some questions. I can see there's questions on here as well. So I think the first thing to think about is that when you have a thought, not when you think, you're actually physically thinking about something. You've got a maths problem, you're sitting there trying to solve it. That is your brain, the thought process. But when you have a thought, a feeling, an emotion, that emotion or feeling you didn't generate, you didn't ask for, it came. And it is a foreign particle attached to your soul that comes. Right? Secondly, I think it's important to understand that if you do not give energy to that particle, if you don't engage with it, if you don't start adding memories and experiences and masala to it, as they say in meditation, just watch that thought and it will go. But we don't let it go because we believe it's our thought. I'm angry because, and then you add 100 reasons. And then the third thing that happens is that we take this and we become so engaged with it that we are now running the day-to-day on automatic whilst we're totally distracted in our thoughts and in our mind. So today we're here binding all this karma, and yet we're totally unaware because we're somewhere else in some other time. This is the paradox of why we suffer. That we don't live the life today, yet we bind the karma today. And then, when you think about that together with the other factors that affect it, memories, experiences, other people's experiences, our ability to understand them is limited because our senses are limited. Today I'm wearing glasses. If my glasses were off, after the 3rd row, I can't see clearly. So everybody past the 3rd row, I'm just making up in my mind, oh, that person was wearing a yellow shirt and this person was sitting next to that person because of my limited senses. And then in that, what typically happens is our thoughts are either sorrowful, self-pity and feeling miserable, or painful about other people. We're, happy in seeing them suffer. The person in the house next to me has this amazing car and, used to boast about it. And today he's had a crash and he's written off. I'm really excited because now he's actually suffered. What's it got to do with me? That suffering, I've just taken on when it had nothing to do with it. And finally, this thing about living through other people, especially your kids. How many people are happy when they see their kids do well and unhappy? So our mind, our happiness, our thoughts, we've rented out to them. And they can make us happy or unhappy. Why? Because of attachment. If we give them to other people's kids, they won't have the same impact. And then we live in this society. And in this society, we largely live in fear, wanting to make sure the right people like us, people don't say things about us, people, but we have no control. If you have no control, why are you worried about? And if they like us, so what? Just think about that. If the person that you want to really like you likes you, so what? There is no, what it is a fear in my mind of what happens if, but there is no positive to it. So this is the state of our mind, but the key element in this is always remember that the thought you've had, that when you get a thought, that is a foreign particle in your soul rising to your mind and giving you that feeling of that thought. I'm going to stop. We've got 10 minutes for questions.
Yeah. So, say you had a traumatic experience, you suffered an accident, or someone suffered bad to you, and actually that fighting and every yes, memories of that scenario. There's some sort of important actually processing it early on, so that you're not in this vicious cycle of having to keep on going through it. Otherwise, it's you won't have to.
So the question is that if you have a traumatic experience and at the time you're calm, but every time you see that sort of experience, you get these feelings, so should you find some way to process them? You see, if we start with this idea of a traumatic experience, the first thing to actually be really clear about is what causes that traumatic experience. And the belief normally is that there is somebody who did something to us. And I can give you an example, the same one I gave yesterday, that you have two kids, you bring them up the same way, the same love and care, the same education, yet they grow up completely different. You want this kid to do well, so you organize tuition, you're running back and forth to all these classes, and, parents become a taxi service for many years, but there's no guarantee of outcome. If there is no guarantee of outcome, that means that our input and the outcome are not related. Our input is our effort, the outcome is, we have no control over. So when you have a traumatic experience, remember that nobody can guarantee that outcome to you. So the trauma is more than likely to be what you have done in the past that is now come back to bite you. Okay? And you might think, well, I'm a really good person, I can't do these things. Well, the past is beyond this life. It's in the last life, and who knows what we were in that life. And what should you do when you have a traumatic experience? In Gujarati, we say samtabha. Samtabha means equanimity. Keep an even mind. Keep the mind here. Don't sit and let it run. If you keep an even mind, at the time anything happens, what happens is that will not come back again. Because you have not used that experience to redo the same thing that you did the first time when you actually bound that karma. So the idea is to keep an even mind, equanimity, samai, samtaba, whatever you want to call it. If that happens, then that will not occur. Now, the third part, when that happens again, or when you see it again, and your thoughts and memories come back, the processing that you have to do is twofold. The first is acceptance, that this happened not because of them, but because of my previously bound karma that I had bound. Acceptance of the responsibility for this. It's very easy when everything happens to blame everybody else because everybody else does everything. Oh, it's bad luck. Accept it. This is mine. But because I haven't reacted to it, it's finished. That's it. I'm beyond it. If you do that, it doesn't come back because you've taken it in your stride, accepted it for what it is. If at the time, even though you were keeping this mind even, but there was a bit of anxiety, a bit of sorrow, a bit of, how can this happen to me? You know, why me? I'm not the kind of person this should happen to. All that will do is grow and grow and grow. So the thing to do is not to plant that seed, because that seed is the thing that will become your memory, and then your experience, and then your emotion. The thing to do is to actually say it happened, but I'm here. That's the good bit. My karma must be rising, the good karma, because I'm here, I'm beyond it, and I've fasted. And the thing that also I believe is you will be stronger for it. Because every time, when I, in one of my companies, my chairman was an Olympic sailor. And he used to always tell me, remember that skillful sailors are never made in calm waters. It's very true. You need the waves and the hurricanes to become the skillful sailor. If you're not facing the waves and the hurricanes, it means your life is, there's no progress. If you're facing them, it means you've overcome that fear and you're going beyond the safe and the, if I never leave my house, nothing will ever happen. But nothing will happen either way. I will not grow as a person. If I want to grow, I have to go beyond into things that are, a bit frightful, a bit scary. But as a result, I will have grown, I will have experienced. And next time, I will be ready. So if you see that as that sort of experience, and don't plant the seed of, this is my suffering. And I guess the lesson in that is always take the positive. There's always a positive. If today you're alive, it's a positive. There's a famous saying that I keep saying on Instagram from Sadhguru that says, every day when you get up, thank God because 1 million people didn't make it. So there's a positive everywhere if you look for it, But there's a negative. If you want it, you'll get up and say, oh God, back to work, another miserable life. Look at the weather, and I don't like the people I work with, and it's raining. Where am I going to get my lunch? And it can be a whole misery. But all of that is in here. It's nowhere else. Next question. Another question. Karma is a significant role in the thought process as well as the mind. How much of experience do you have? Interesting question. So karma plays a big role in the thought process and mind. How much free will do we have? So the question, and then I'm going to take one from here before I come to you. So what is free will? I think it's important to understand, right? And what does free will allow? So when you are doing something, putting effort in, that effort is your free will. That is the only free will you have. So today, if you are going to sit an exam next week. Whether you're disciplined enough to get up at 6 and study, or whether you get to the exam but you've only done half the work, that effort is yours. Now, even in that effort, what will happen is that you might have so much, we'll call it lazy karma, that getting up and doing this is difficult. Keeping attention is difficult. If you persist, at some point you will overcome the karma. There's a limited amount, you don't know how much, but you keep going and going and going and going, and someday it'll disappear, and then you will have no problems doing it. It's a bit like people who, start yoga and they can't bend and they can't reach and whatever. After a year of going and going and going, they're doing all the asanas, but you have to keep it going. That's your free will. If you're looking at action and saying, if I do this, I want this outcome, that is not free will, because the outcome is not in your hands. And that's why people, they mistake the two and they say, I can't judge the outcome, so, there's no free will. It's a bit like the lottery. Tonight there was Saturday, right? So there's a lottery. But you have to buy the ticket. Even if the outcome was you were supposed to win it, if you don't buy the ticket, you won't win it. You have to do the action, and then the outcome depends on your karma. But that action depends on you. So if you don't put effort, there is no outcome. If you put the effort, if there is no outcome, you will have at least put the effort against that karma and thinned it a little bit. And you do that again, and you thin it a bit more, and you do that again. That's why if you keep going, someday it'll happen, but we don't know when. That is Purusha. So I have a question on here saying, do thoughts come to you, come from your past experience, present, or past lives? So thoughts are basically karma that you have bound through previous actions. If today I get angry and I bind anger karma, sometime in the future when that karma ripens, it has to make me angry because, that's what I did, I have to suffer. To make me angry, it rises and in my mind causes an emotion and feeling of anger. Now, that is what is pulling the karma in, that action. The passion that I attach to it, if I become raging with anger and jealousy and whatever, that is the rag, that is the glue. If I don't attach any passion and I say, this is not my thought, let it go, it goes. If I attach the passion, I bind it back. So the bondage is related to the thought, which attracts it, or the deed or the word, and then the passion, which glues it. You can't stop doing some actions, but if you do them without passion, without this expectation of outcome, without, the anger, without the rage, you just do it. You'll attract the karma, but they will drop because there's nothing to stick with rag. Nirupai, you had a question. Okay, so the two questions were that if you want to get rid of your thought process, do you have to stand on one leg in the Himalayas as a sannyasi? And is it bad to have a vision if you're a president or a prime minister or somebody? You see, there is a difference that I'm making a clear differential here, and you have to look at that differential. What I'm saying is that absent-minded thinking, which happens automatically, which is running in your mind 24 hours a day, based on things that are, so you're driving, but you're thinking about, when I went there last time, it was a horrible experience, and he said that to me, and I felt like this, and that, or, when I go there this time, if they say something, I'm going to say this, and I'm going to do that, is what I'm saying you shouldn't do, because that thinking is not you thinking. That is thoughts and passions you're having that you're reacting to. And in that reaction, you're running this story, this film in your mind. That only is yours. There's nobody else involved in this film, and all it's doing is binding that karma. What you should be doing is actually thinking consciously. If you sit and think consciously, I'm going to go there, what am I going to say? I have to talk today about mindfulness. What am I going to say? What kind of things will people ask me? What kind of answers? That is okay. That is all good. But if I'm sitting there saying, yesterday I was doing this, but, this person came in a yellow shirt just to put me off, and they were sitting there, texting, that is the differential, right? And the second is that when you are doing these things, there is a right and a wrong. The right is that if the wrong is painful, sorrow, self-pity, and evil, the right is the opposite of that. So what is the opposite of that? Well, you have compassion, kindness, good, beneficial. If you are sitting here as a president or something, thinking about the benefit of the members and what you're going to do to uplift them, it's wonderful. Now, bear in mind something else, which is very important, which is that, and it's incredibly important, that in Jainism, there's a concept called nirjara. Nirjara means that we shed karma. You cannot shed karma until you shed karma generally, because what happens is that when it ripens, it sheds. But prematurely shedding karma requires you to have an experience of the soul, samyak darshan, because then you get the power of detaching things from your soul, right? So you know that in the past you bound bad things, and you know that they're going to come and give you some result, but you have no ability yet to shed the karma. What you have an ability to do through your thoughts, through your processes, through your actions, is to bind good karma. And when you bind good karma and your bad karma and your good karma rise together, the good karma will negate the effects of the bad karma. You had to have an accident because that was your bad karma. You had a little scrape and a little scratch. That's the good karma. So when we sit there and say, bad luck, I scratched my car. In fact, it's incredibly good luck because you only scratched your car. What should have perhaps happened is that your car should have been written off, but you had such good karma that it prevented. And that is also the way to do this, that every time something happens, there is always a big positive. But we tend to focus on the negative. We then make it big. Oh, that guy was probably drunk and he probably didn't know where he was going. And, he didn't care about his car. And, I looked after my car. You don't need any of that. You just need to say, okay, it's happened. Except why? Because it's my karma. Stop. And that nothing happened. Excellent. Positive. So if you change that attitude, I'm going to say this again tomorrow, but it's the two most important things I'll tell you. If you change that attitude, you will bring happiness to yourself wherever you are, number one. Happiness is not an environment, it is a state of mind. If you change the state of mind, you will change happiness. And the second is you are always what you think. If your thoughts are always good and positive, your life will always be good and positive because your karma will be good and positive. So the benefit you get will be good and positive, and your future will be good and positive. So that little change will absolutely change your whole life. But it means that accepting everything and seeing the positive in everything needs to become a habit. And that way, there is a saying I've heard quite a lot that, what can anybody do to me? What's the worst they can do to me? They can only kill me if my karma runs out. So they can say what they want, do what they want, but the effect will never happen. So why do I live in this sorrowful, fearful life? Any other questions? From there?
What is Jiknakaram Vedanta? What is that? What is it?
Jiknakaram, otherwise called Nikachit Karam. If you bind karma, where you just say something, oh, I don't like the shirt he's wearing, little karma. And if I then do that with anger, how can he wear that shirt? I have that shirt, and now he's worn it. I can never wear it. He's such an idiot. And if you bind it with passion that strong, that karma you cannot get rid of without getting the full effect. You have to suffer. So when people do things with anger, with lots of pride, lots of greed, jealousy, hatred, they're full of passion. If I slap somebody happily, just a tap, that's very different to being angry, hitting them. And in that passion, you bind karma called nikachit, chikna. And that karma is so tight that you will have to suffer the effect. Nobody can get rid of it. The example that is always given is Bhagwan Mahavir, when he was meditating and that cowherd put nails in his ears. So he was going to be a Tirthankar. He was almost at the point of Evognan, and yet this happened because those were Chiknaka, Nikachit. So those things will always happen.
Usually sorry because we still suffer, or it's
It reduces. It reduces. But you see, if you do your karma with so much passion, and then you say, oh, sorry, which I no power, there is no effect. That is why even the pratikamana we do, I keep saying, do it with power. If there is no power, there is no effect. If you do the pratikaman next door, the full pratikaman, spend time and learn it. Because how can you say Vichami Dukra with power if you haven't understood the sutra that they're reciting? Say it with power. And that power will completely reduce it. That's why they always tell you, become humble, live in humility. Because the only thing you have to fear is the karma you bind. Everything else will come and go. Please, and then I'll come.
Because it's not always bad and bad karmas. It could be even good karmas.
If you have strong, good passion, yes, you will get strong, good karmas.
So if your argument says, that means you will have such a factor. There is no way out.
You see, that's why the phrase that people always use is punya karma na udaitai. When somebody is doing well, they're saying that punya karma is rising. Whatever they do, things will go well. And that's absolutely true. And that's why you see what happens is you see some people trying so hard and nothing happens, and some people without trying get everything. One more.
Current mindfulness techniques, obviously, they say rely on your senses, and that kind of ground us. To, I guess, ground yourself.
So tomorrow, that's the topic. That way I know you'll come tomorrow. Tomorrow's topic is on techniques to become mindful. And mindful in the sense that you see, I always say to people that when you learn religion, The purpose is not to become religious. The purpose is to do whatever you do knowingly. Do as much path as you want, but do it knowingly. Know that I'm doing this and I'll suffer. But then you do it, that's your problem. But the problem is when people do it unknowingly, and then they suffer, and then they cause more suffering, and they don't know why they're in this cycle. One more.
So, untie.
Yes.
People say, if you have untie with somebody with incompatibility with it, just stay away from them. It may never resolve. Issues will never resolve. What's your view on untie?
What is antray? Antray basically is an obstruction, right? If yesterday, take yesterday's example, I wanted to come here to do pratikam. I left 1 hour, 20 minutes, and I thought it was a 40-minute route. And it took me more than 1 hour, 20 minutes to get here, right? There was traffic jams, there was temporary lights, a bus got stuck. This is antray. That when you want to do something, there is something obstructing your path, right? And that can be anything. Now, what can you do about that? Well, I could sit there and I could swear and curse. Isn't going to do anything. I could basically try other routes, keep trying. I did that. Or I can say, well, I'm going to carry on. When it happens, it happens. So I phone Dhirubhai and say, keep them entertained, I'm coming. But the reality is that we will always face antray for the simple reason that in our life, we always obstruct others' progress. If I have a book and I know somebody needs that book to learn, but I kind of keep it hidden, that's antray. I'm causing an obstruction to their learning. If somebody wants to do something and I have the ability to help them, but I hide it or don't do it or make sure they don't get it, I'm obstructing their progress. The reason we do that is we believe that if somebody progresses, they'll get beyond us. But what does it matter? Why are we comparing and in a race? And so our causing other people not to achieve actually gives the blockages to our own life. Yes, you're letting them live in your brain free of charge. You're letting them influence your thoughts. You're making them responsible for your happiness. And in that baggage, what do you suffer? I mean, just think about think about people. Forget the current. Let's park that for 1 minute. Think about people who have that much baggage about what has happened or other people, and they always have this anger and hatred. And what happens? It's called blood pressure, cholesterol, sugar, diabetes, because that's what it does to your body. And that is the suffering. So you start to have the physical suffering with everything else, because all you're doing is playing that tape again and again. If you let that tape go, you will not. The key is that what people do is let that tape go, but another tape starts to play. The thing is to let them go and move your thinking to the present. Focus where you are. If you're sitting here today, see, a simple question, right? All of you sitting here, how many of you know who's sitting behind you? Apart from seeing the reflection, that's a question of awareness. How many of you know how many people have come? You see, we don't do these things. What we do is we just come and sit down and then, phone and then text and then thinking about something. We're never living here. If you live here, observe what's going on here, become part of here, then your life changes because you're no longer living in this imaginary world. You're living in the present that you find yourself. It's 9:20. I'm going to say thank you, Jai Jinandra. Tomorrow, we've talked about thoughts and we've talked about mind. Tomorrow, we'll talk about what we can do to overcome them. So I hope to see you all tomorrow. And take care.
Yes.